What the Mist Keeps, a Karl Otto story. The bus's engine growled behind him, the sound deeper than he remembered. Karl turned, and the world seemed to slow. The massive vehicle lurched forward, its metal body reflecting the autumn sun with an almost blinding intensity. Something was wrong with the way it moved, like a predator, too fast, too purposeful. The wheels scraped against the pavement, a sound that vibrated in Karl's chest. "Careful!" The scream shattered the air. Time fractured. The vehicle's shockwave slammed into him, a rush of exhaust fumes and crisp fall breeze swirling together as he gasped. The screech of brakes pierced his ears, a sound like tortured metal and dying dreams. His lilies exploded upward, white petals caught in a violent dance with yellow leaves and dark exhaust. The impact was both deafening and eerily quiet, a soft thud, a muffled crack. A shape in a dark coat rolled beneath the massive wheels, features mercifully obscured by the storm of flowers and leaves. A single shoe, brown leather, skittered across the pavement like a frightened animal. "Jesus!" Karl whispered, his hands shaking. "That could have been me, if I'd stepped just a second earlier." A crowd was gathering. An elderly woman pressed her hands to her mouth. "Someone call an ambulance." "I'm trying," a man in a green jacket said, holding his phone. No signal. Karl stepped forward. "Here, I have full bars." "We need to cover him," the elderly woman said, looking past Karl to the body. "It's not right, leaving him like that." "Did anyone see what happened?" A cemetery worker approached, his face pale. "I did," Karl said. "The bus just—" "He came out of nowhere," the man with the phone interrupted. "1 minute the path was empty, then—" "Such a young man, too," the elderly woman sighed. "About my son's age." Karl touched the woman's shoulder, trying to give her comfort. "Are you okay?" "It's getting cold," she said, wrapping her coat tighter. "Should we wait for the police?" The cemetery worker nodded. "They're on their way. Best clear the area." "I can give a statement," Karl insisted. "I saw everything." "Poor soul," the woman murmured. "At least it was quick." Karl felt uncomfortable in the presence of the body and decided not to wait. There were plenty of people to give the police their statements. His mother's grave wasn't far. He could cut across the burial plots instead of taking the long way around. The Ohlsdorf Cemetery sprawled across nearly 1,000 acres, making it the largest rural cemetery in the world. Its park-like grounds housed over 1 million graves beneath ancient trees, a city of the dead in the heart of Hamburg. He'd visited his mother's grave twice a month since the funeral. How could he be lost? The cemetery sections were clearly marked, each path carefully maintained in typical German efficiency. Yet somehow the familiar landmarks had vanished, leaving only endless rows of headstones stretching into the fog. Karl wandered through the endless rows of graves, each path leading nowhere. The mist seemed to thicken with every step, transforming familiar monuments into looming shadows. His phone showed no signal, and the screen flickered oddly when he tried to open the cemetery map. The time on the phone read 2:17 p.m., the time that the bus was scheduled to pick him up. A violin's note pierced through the mist, startling him. "Hello?" Karl called out. No one should be this deep in the old section, especially not someone playing music. The melody continued, closer now. "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," in the Suzuki Method style. Max's first recital piece. The one he'd practiced every morning for 3 months, dragging his violin case with the superhero stickers all over it into Karl's home office. "Listen, Dad, I got better." Through the fog, he caught a glimpse of a small figure standing between the graves, a boy in a school uniform, violin held slightly too high against his chin, like beginners often do. Karl's heart clenched. He looked just like... Max? His son's name escaped his lips before he could stop it. But it couldn't be Max. Max was gone. Karl had missed so many opportunities to be with him. Instead, he sat at his desk, answering emails that could have waited, promising to be there soon. He'd missed the recital, just like he'd missed so much else. One more broken promise before that final, terrible day with the German football. The boy paused in his playing, sheet music slipping from the small music stands he'd always insisted on using, even when practicing at home. He turned toward Karl, but the mist obscured his face. "I'm sorry," Karl whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the boy or to the memory of his son. "I should have been there. Work wasn't... I should have made it to your concert. Should have watched you play. Should have watched you with the ball. I should have. The boy lowered his violin, pointing the bow at something behind Karl. When Karl turned, there was only more mist, more graves. When he looked back, both the boy and the angel were gone. A bus rumbled somewhere in the distance, its engine sound distorting in the mist, like screaming brakes, like impact, like regret. The air grew heavy with the scent of wet stone and decaying leaves. Each breath felt thick, as if the fog itself was trying to smother him. In the distance, church bells tolled with a hollow, mournful sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the memory of Max, but he was long gone, leaving him alone with his guilt. Or almost alone. Through the fog, he caught glimpses of other figures moving between the graves. Some wore modern clothes, others in styles from decades past. None of them seemed to notice him. "You promised, Karl." Elise's voice cut through the mist, sharp as the day she'd left. "You promised things would be different." "I tried." The words caught in his throat, same as they had that night. "Tried? You weren't even there." Her silhouette emerged from the fog, familiar yet wrong somehow. "How many times did you say, 'just one more email,' or 5 more minutes? How many moments did you miss?" "I had responsibilities." "We were your responsibility." The force of her words seemed to make the mist itself recoil. "He needed you. He was counting on you. And you chose." "Please," Karl reached for her, but she was already fading. "Elise, I didn't know. How could I have known?" "You knew exactly what you were doing." Her voice grew distant. "Every time you looked at your phone instead of him, every time you chose the office over home, you knew. You just didn't care enough to change." The mist swallowed her form, leaving Karl alone with the echo of words spoken years ago, or minutes ago. Time felt strange here, fluid like the fog that wrapped around his ankles. A violin's note hung in the air, a single perfect tone that seemed to freeze his blood. From somewhere in the darkness, a child's voice called out, "Dad, are you coming?" "Max?" Karl spun around, but there was only more mist, more graves, more regret. A German football bounced past his feet, moving its way through the gray mist. Karl's chest tightened. Not this memory. Not here. "Dad!" a boy's voice called from the fog. "Watch me." "Max?" Karl's voice cracked. "No, please." But the memory was already unfolding. Summer light pierced the mist, showing him fragments of that day 3 years ago. Max, his son, showing off his fledgling football skills in the backyard. Karl distracted, answering a business call he should have ignored. The ball bouncing toward the street. "Look what I can do!" Max's voice echoed through the cemetery. "Max, wait!" Karl called out, though he knew it was useless. You can't change memories. Can't undo the moment you chose to look at your phone instead of your son. Can't unsee. The screech of brakes cut through the mist. Karl fell to his knees, hands pressed against his ears, but he couldn't block out the sounds. The thud, the screams, Elise's voice crying, "Why weren't you watching him?" The days after were a blur of hospital corridors and funeral homes, of coffee gone cold and words that meant nothing. Elise wouldn't look at him. Couldn't. The silence between them grew like a living thing, fed by guilt and grief and things left unsaid. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "I can't do this anymore, Karl. I can't keep watching you run away." They divorced 2 years ago, a year after Max's death. He'd moved away from Munich then, changed jobs, changed cities. Hadn't spoken to Elise since the divorce. Max's death 3 years ago had created a rift between them that no amount of time could heal. Karl missed everything. The funeral arrangements, the grief counseling Elise had suggested, even the small memorial service on the first anniversary. Always too busy, always too far away, always running from what he'd done. The mist parted briefly, revealing another headstone. Karl didn't want to look, but his eyes were drawn to the inscription, Max's name, his dates, and below them, words that made his heart stop. "Beloved son, gone too soon." But this was wrong. Max was buried in Munich near Elise. Unless... A bus's engine rumbled nearby, the sound circling through the mist. Karl stumbled to his feet, trying to get away from the memory, from the guilt, from the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. The mist thickened until he could barely see his own hands. Somewhere, a child laughed. A ball bounced. Brakes screamed. Voices drifted through the mist. A gathering of some kind. The sound of a priest's solemn tone, muffled sobs. As Karl moved closer, black-clad figures emerged from the fog. A funeral service. His heart stopped. There, standing apart from the mourners, was his mother. She wore the blue dress they'd buried her in, her silver hair arranged just as he remembered. But she looked whole, at peace. "Mom?" His voice cracked. She turned, a sad smile on her face. "Oh, Karl, you always carried so much weight on your shoulders. But you can't be." "Shh." She stepped closer, and he could smell her perfume, lavender and vanilla, just like when he was a child. "The past is heavy, isn't it? All those regrets, those moments you wish you could change." "I made so many mistakes," Karl's voice broke. "Max, Elise, everyone. We all make mistakes, sweetheart, but at some point, you have to let them go." "I never meant—" Karl choked on the words. "Work was just supposed to be temporary, just until I made partner. I was going to be there more, spend more time at home." "I know, love, you always had good intentions." His mother's voice was gentle but sad. "But life isn't measured in intentions, is it? It's measured in moments, the football games you missed, the school plays you were too busy for, Max's concert. I was going to be there, I swear I was. Just one more email. Always one more email, one more meeting, one more reason to miss the moments that mattered." She reached out, her hand cool against his cheek. "Did any of it seem important in the end? When you saw Max in the street?" Karl's legs trembled. "Please stop. You can't run from this anymore, Karl. You've been running for so long." She glanced at the gathered mourners. "It's time to face what happened, all of it." The fog shifted, revealing the gathered mourners more clearly. Karl recognized faces, colleagues from work, neighbors, even Elise, tears streaming down her face. A photo stood on an easel beside a casket, his own face smiling back at him. "No," he stumbled backward. I'm not—" "It's okay to be scared," his mother said softly. "Facing your regrets is always frightening." Through the mist, a small figure appeared beside the casket. Max, wearing his favorite red t-shirt and grass-stained jeans. The same clothes from that summer afternoon, now torn and darkened with old blood. His small hand still clutched his favorite football, though his arm bent at an unnatural angle. His face was how they'd found him after the car struck. Pale skin mottled purple, eyes vacant and clouded, skull caved in on one side where the bumper had caught him. Dark blood still matted his hair, dripping slowly onto his collar like it had that day, when Karl had finally looked up from his phone to see his son's broken body in the street. "Dad?" Max's voice echoed strangely, bubbling wetly through split lips. "We've been waiting?" "No!" Karl turned to run, but his foot found empty air instead of solid ground. He was falling, tumbling into an open grave, his grave. Above him, dark figures gathered at the edge, shovels scraping against dirt piles. His mother's face appeared against the gray sky, her expression full of love and sorrow. "Rest now, Karl," she whispered as the first shovelful of earth fell. "Let go." The dirt hit his face, filling his mouth as he tried to scream. The bus's engine growled behind him, the sound deeper than he remembered. Karl turned, and the world seemed to slow. The massive vehicle lurched forward, its metal body reflecting the autumn sun with an almost blinding intensity. Something was wrong with the way it moved, like a predator, too fast, too purposeful. The wheels scraped against the pavement, a sound that vibrated in Karl's chest. "Careful!" The scream shattered the air. Karl Weber, a man tormented not by the supernatural, but by the specter of his own remorse. A successful executive who discovered too late that existence's balance sheet counts not dollars and cents, but time squandered and connections unfulfilled. His cage wasn't fashioned from concrete and iron, but from just another moment and one last email. At Ohlsdorf Cemetery, where countless tales rest beneath a sea of headstones, Karl confronted the most chilling wraith imaginable, the apparition of the path untaken, the dad he never became. A stark lesson that our deepest fears often stem not from otherworldly entities, but from our own decisions, our broken words, and the affection we failed to cherish. Karl Weber found his never-ending path through the fog of his own punishment.